Okay, in order to talk about what helps executive functions, I figured first I should say what they are. So there are a lot of the abilities and skills that are critical for us to succeed at almost anything we want to do. First, there's self-control, to resist temptations and not act impulsively. So for a little kid to wait your turn, raise your hand, not grab a toy for another. For any of us, it's to think before you speak so that you don't do something you'd regret or put your foot in your mouth. So wait before making up your mind, not jumping to a conclusion or reacting right away because we might be wrong about why somebody did something, for example. It's not pressing send immediately on an email message, not blurting out the first thing that comes to mind, etc. Discipline and perseverance, having the discipline to stay on task and complete it. Resisting temptations to quit because you're frustrated at how slow it's going and how difficult it is, because you're bored, because it's too easy, or there are a lot more fun things to do. Continuing to work even though the reward might be a long time in coming. Evidence shows that discipline accounts for over twice as much variation in grades as does IQ, even in college. Attentional control, being able to pay attention, to concentrate, stay focused, even when the material's boring and even when there's distraction in the room. Young children have very immature attentional control. They can easily get distracted by beautiful posters on the wall. So, for example, most kindergarten and first grade teachers decorate their rooms beautifully with all kinds of posters and pictures on the page. Well, a recent study has shown that children actually do better in school, are able to learn more, pay better attention when the walls are more bare. Each wall can be painted a beautiful color, but if there are attractive things up there to look at, children with poor attentional control will get distracted by them. Another example of what executive functions do is helping us to be able to have the creativity to see connections between different ideas and facts and theories, to play with them in our mind, combine them, and maybe disassemble that combination and recombine them in a new way. To working memory is being able to hold information in mind and work with it. And there's another kind of creativity in seeing familiar things in new ways, from different perspectives. If one way of solving a problem isn't working, can we conceive of the problem in a different way? Can we think outside the box to come up with a completely different way of attacking the problem? Like Barbara Arrowsmith came up with a completely different way of thinking about education. Einstein said, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Karen Pape, who's an MD in Ontario, she used to be at 6 Kids Hospital, has done thinking out of the box to be able to help kids with motor coordination problems when everybody else couldn't. I have the URL here. By the way, I know I talk very quickly. Nobody can write as fast as I speak. So I always give my slides to the organizers of a conference and make them available to people. So don't try to write, and so this URL will be available. Flexibility is another one. Having the flexibility to take advantage of unexpected opportunities, serendipity, to navigate around unforeseen obstacles, and to admit that you were wrong when you get more information. An example of poor cognitive flexibility is given by Alexander Graham Bell. When one door closes, another door opens, but we often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see the ones which open for us. Executive function is shorthand for all the things I just mentioned. Executive functions are needed whenever going on automatic wouldn't work, when it's insufficient or detrimental. So there are 3 core executive functions. One is inhibitory control, and that includes the self-control, discipline, and attentional control that I mentioned. Then there's, working memory, which, as I mentioned, is important for holding information in mind and playing with it and working with it. And cognitive flexibility, which includes the creative problem solving and flexibility that I mentioned. And from those, higher order executive functions are built, like problem solving, reasoning, and planning. Children with better inhibitory control, that is little kids who were more persistent, less impulsive, and had better attention regulation, years later as teenagers are less likely to make risky choices, have unplanned pregnancies, or drop out of school. And 30 years later as adults have better health, higher incomes and better jobs, fewer run-ins with the law, and a better quality of life than those who as little kids had worse inhibitory control. And that's true controlling for almost every variable under the sun. It's based on a study of 1,000 kids born in the same city in the same year, followed for 32 years with a 96% retention rate. I wish I did the study. The authors conclude, interventions that achieve even small improvements in inhibitory control for individuals could shift the entire distribution of outcomes in a salutary direction and yield large improvements in health, wealth, and crime rate for a nation. The second core executive function is working memory. Working memory is critical for making sense of anything that unfolds over time, because that always requires holding in mind what happened before and relating that to what's happening now. So if you think about it, it's critical for anything that involves language. For oral language, it's obvious. But you have to hold in mind what you heard before to relate it to what you're hearing now. But even for reading, even at the level of a sentence, rarely do you see all the words at the same time. So you have to hold in mind what you read before and relate it to what you're reading now. And for many other things, you need working memory. Working memory is also holding information in mind while working on something else. For example, let's say after one of the talks at the conference, you wanted to make a comment or ask a question, but other people were called on before you and you wanted to follow the ongoing discussion. You need working memory to hold in mind the thing you wanted to say while you're still listening to everybody else talking. Executive function skills can be improved even in infants or preschoolers without expensive, highly technical equipment by regular teachers in regular classrooms. It's out of place, sorry, I'll come back to that. Cognitive flexibility is the third core executive function. And to give you an example of that, one of the ways we measure it is with a task called design fluency or creative uses. It asks you to come up with unusual, out-of-the-box uses for common objects. So one question might be, what are all the crazy, insane, unusual uses you could come up with for a table? Obviously, you can eat on a table, you can write on a table. What else might you do on a table, with a table? Somebody. Build stuff. Build a fort. I'm sorry, somebody said? Yes. Something over here? Yes, you can do all kinds of stuff. The things I came up with was you could dance on it, turn it on its side to keep a door closed or shield you from things somebody might be throwing at you, to get under it to stay dry or hide, or chop it up for firewood. How can we stop ourselves from getting really upset when a child misbehaves? What we usually get upset about is the intent we think is behind an action. But we could use cognitive flexibility to reframe. A child might be acting in the most awful manner because he's been terribly hurt, and he's afraid of being hurt again. So he'll push you away before you have a chance of pushing him away. Or he'll test you to see if you're really somebody he can feel safe with. If we see the misbehavior as coming from hurt, we can react completely differently. Okay, I don't have time to show you this test, but I want to use it to illustrate something. This is a test we use with 3 to 5-year-olds. It's a sorting test. So if you're sorting by color, this blue truck would go with the blue star. But if you're sorting by shape, the same blue truck now goes with the red truck. 3-year-olds can sort by either color or shape. They're fine. The problem comes when you have to switch. They can't switch. They keep sorting by the first dimension. So only 20% of 3-year-olds can switch. By the time you're 4, most kids can switch. And I'll give you the URLs for 2 videos so that you can see it, because it's so incredible. You have to see it to believe it. Because the kids are trying their best, and they know what the rules are, but they can't help sorting by the old way. And it's that scene that they're trying their best, and they're still not doing it, that is so convincing. It's not enough to know something and remember it. You have to get that knowledge into your behavior. People had assumed that if children knew what they should do, they would do it. If they didn't, they were intentionally misbehaving. But these videos show you how it's very possible to want with all your heart to do the right thing, but not be able to. Between knowing and implementing, another step long ignored is often needed. When there's a strong competing response, that response has to be inhibited, and young children may not be able to do that. A child may know what he or she should do and want to do that, but still not be able to act accordingly. Executive functions are important for every aspect of life. Success in school and in the workplace, making and keeping friends, marital harmony, avoiding things like unplanned pregnancy, substance abuse, or driving fatalities. In other words, self-control, creativity, reasoning, mental flexibility, discipline, and perseverance are really important, and they're often more predictive than IQ. Executive functions predict academic performance from the earliest grades through university better than does IQ. Poor executive functions can lead to poor physical health, like obesity, overeating, poor food choices, substance abuse, or poor sustained adherence to doctor's orders. In a large sample of over 14,000 teenagers, Miller found that those with poor self-control were exponentially more likely to suffer from 9 of the 10 adverse health outcomes that they looked at. Before I told you about Terry Moffat's study with 1,000 kids born in the same city at the same time. This is 500 fraternal twin pairs raised in the same home. The twin with poor executive function at age 5 was more likely to smoke, do poorly in school, and engage in aggressive or antisocial behavior at age 12, even though the kids had the same parents and were raised in the same home. If we want children to do well in school and in life, we need to help them develop healthy executive functions. And the good news is that executive functions can be improved. I'm going to skip that. I just said this earlier out of order, that it can be done in young kids without drugs or highly expensive equipment by regular teachers in regular classrooms. Executive functions depend on the prefrontal cortex and the other neural regions with which it's interconnected. For example, the middle frontal gyrus that you heard Laura Boyd talk about is in prefrontal cortex. This is supposed to illustrate brain development. The youngest age is up here. The older age is 20. It goes down to here. And the blue-violet is the adult level. So what you can see at 5 years of age is that motor cortex, somatosensory cortex, visual cortex are already pretty mature, but prefrontal cortex is very immature. You get up here at 20 years of age, and prefrontal cortex still has some green. It still isn't fully mature. So many people have doubted whether executive functions could be improved in young kids or babies. They say, you don't have enough of a biological substrate. Prefrontal cortex is too immature. Why don't you wait until kids are older before trying to improve executive functions? And in response, I give the analogy of a 2-year-old's legs. A 2-year-old's legs are not at their full adult extent. They won't be at their full adult extent for another 15 years or more. But with those immature legs, the 2-year-old can walk, the 2-year-old can even run, which is to say that even when it's not at the full adult extent, it can still be functional. Not fully functional like us, but functional. And with training and practice, it can get better. And Agnes Kovacs has shown that even before babies are speaking, babies who are brought up with one parent speaking one language and the other parent speaking another language show better executive function at age 7 months than babies who only hear one language. There are 3 basic ways to improve functioning that requires executive function. One is to work on executive functions, train them, challenge them, keep practicing. Another is to work on reducing things that impair them, like stress or lack of sleep. And a third is to reduce the demands on executive function. For example, there's no reason to tax your memory and trying to remember everything you're supposed to do today. You can write it down. It takes a lot of effort to use executive functions. So whenever you can get around it, you should. So instead of working hard to keep many things in mind, write them down. If you don't want your children to eat the cookies, put them in something that's opaque, not something that's clear and they see it every time they pass by the kitchen. Vygotsky talked about the importance of social pretend play for training and improving executive functions in very young children. And if you think about it, it's a really good idea. First of all, let's say you're playing cops and robbers. You have to remember what role you picked and what role your friends picked, right? Because let's say you're planning the robbery. You don't want to accidentally tell the cop. I mean, that would be terrible. You have to remember who's who. And you have to stay in character. So if you said you were going to be the baby in the scenario, you can't all of a sudden get up and drive the fancy family car. You have to stay in character. And your friends may take that scenario in ways you never imagined. So on the fly, in real time, you have to flexibly adjust. You have to use inhibition, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. And you're playing. So you're just challenging them and working on it in a fun situation. Contrary to influential reviews of the benefits of aerobic exercise, exercise without a cognitive component, right, like riding a stationary bike or running on a treadmill, does not seem to improve executive functions. Now, there's one big difference between the studies I'm going to talk about and what Laura talked about, which is I specifically excluded studies that looked only after one session. So I only looked at studies that looked at something over time, whether it was weeks or months, whatever. I didn't look after one session because I didn't think I could understand how that necessarily translated into doing a program of that. So the studies I looked at had to have pre and post tests because, of course, you have to see how the person performs before the exercise and after. They had to have a control group, because otherwise you don't know if maybe they would have improved without the exercise, maybe just taking the test twice would improve them. They couldn't just be correlations, because correlations don't tell you causality. So for example, it could be a correlation that kids in sports do better in school. But if it's just a correlation, you don't know if maybe the kids who would have done better in school anyway chose to be in sports. So it needs to be causal. And for our review, it needed to be more than a single session. Of those studies in kids, 80% of them found no benefit to cognitive function, executive functions or other. Of the 7 studies that have examined executive function benefits from aerobic activity that had the best study design, which is an active control group, not simply a wait list or no treatment group, 6 of those 7 were with older adults. And 2/3 of them, again, found no benefit to executive functions whatsoever from aerobic exercise. Similarly, 2 meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials found minimal or no executive function benefits from all of the many studies they reanalyzed together. This is just for the more geeky people, and you can look at it in more depth later. But what you can see is that all the circles are hovering around one line, and that line is 0. This is for the effect of aerobic exercise on executive function from one of those meta-analyses. And you can see that just about every study is right around the 0 point. This is working memory benefit. All the circles are again hovering around the 0 point for the benefits of aerobic exercise on working memory. Excuse me. Consistent with the disappointing effects of mindless aerobics, like aerobics where you don't have to think at all, on executive functions, is the consistent finding that improvements in aerobic fitness are uncorrelated with cognitive improvements. So even some studies of aerobics that find executive function improvements don't find any relationship between aerobic improvement, like lung capacity and how hard your heart beats after exercise, and improvement in cognition. They don't correlate in a given study. People improve on the skills they practice, and that transfers to other contexts where the same skills are needed. But people only improve on what they practice. Improvement doesn't transfer to other skills. If improvement in a particular executive function skill is your goal, then you need to engage in activities that require and train executive function skills. But people who are more physically active and have better aerobic fitness have better executive functions. That's been shown consistently. They're correlated, whether you look in kids or you look in older adults. If you're more fit, if you're more physically active, you have better executive functions. How can you put those together? That studies that randomly assign people to aerobics show no benefit to executive functions. When you see an improvement in aerobic fitness, it's uncorrelated with improvement in cognitive fitness, but the people who are more physically fit have better executive functions. We don't know. I'm going to suggest possibilities, but we don't know why you find this. Perhaps people need to do aerobic activity for longer, perhaps years versus months, so that the intervention studies are looking at too short a period of time. Maybe many people who maintain better fitness do so by participating in physical activities that involve cognitive challenges. Most sports involve cognitive challenges. Dance involves cognitive challenges. It's only the mindless aerobic activity that is in most intervention studies, where you're just running in place, or just riding a stationary bike, or biking around the room all the time. Doing anything where you don't have to think is where they don't find an effect. Maybe people who freely choose to do aerobic activities enjoy them more than people who are randomly assigned to them in these intervention studies. Exercise improves mood, relieves stress and depressed mood, and improves sleep. Perhaps these indirect effects of reducing stress and improving sleep are what, over the long term, gives you better executive functions. I want to come back to the benefit of physical activity for cognition. You only see it, evidence is suggesting now, this is new data, that you only see the benefit to executive function if you're enjoying the physical activity. If you're not enjoying it, you don't see it. So boring exercise is particularly unlikely to yield cognitive benefits. It could be that the correlation between better physical and cognitive fitness is due to one or more other variables and not better fitness per se. Perhaps people who are physically fit have the good sense to eat better or get more sleep, tend to be healthier in general, or tend to be more highly educated. Or maybe causality goes in the opposite direction, since one probably needs good executive functions, especially good inhibitory control and discipline, to maintain a regular exercise regimen. At least the evidence so far seems to indicate that it's not the mindless aerobic exercise itself that's causing the benefit. Exercise alone is not as effective as exercise that includes character development, like traditional martial arts, or exercise plus mindfulness, like yoga. And this is early days, so it's only based on a few studies. Lakes and Hoyt randomly assigned kids in kindergarten through grade 5, either to Taekwondo or to standard phys ed. What they found is the kids in Taekwondo showed greater gains at the end of the school year than children in standard phys ed on all the dimensions of executive function they studied. It generalized to multiple contexts and was found on multiple measures. Now, traditional martial arts, like traditional Taekwondo, emphasize self-control, discipline, respect for the instructor, character development, and you're not supposed to go in and immediately attack. You have to exercise inhibitory control and wait till your opponent gives you the opportunity. Wait till the other person is slightly off balance, like maybe starting to go for you. And then you take advantage of that, and now you move. So you have to wait for the opportunity and not do what you might be first inclined to do. In a study with adolescent juvenile delinquents, one group was assigned to traditional Taekwondo. The other group was assigned to modern martial arts. Martial arts simply as a physical activity, simply as a competitive sport, nothing about character development or waiting before you act. Those in traditional Taekwondo showed less aggression and anxiety and improved in social ability and self-esteem. But those in modern martial arts showed more juvenile delinquency and aggressiveness and decreased self-esteem and social ability. Whether executive function gains are seen depends on the way an activity is done. Both were called martial arts. One gave good things and one gave bad. And that's true for everything. You can call it by the same name, but you need to see what's happening there. Regardless of the program to improve executive functions, a few principles hold, and those include executive function training appears to transfer, but the transfer is not wide. For example, computerized working memory training improves working memory, but it doesn't improve self-control, creativity, or flexibility. Commercial computerized training programs are claiming widespread cognitive benefits, but wide transfer just doesn't occur. On the rare occasions where it's been found, the findings haven't been replicated. To see widespread benefits, diverse skills must be practiced. So you're not seeing wide transfer, you're seeing narrow transfer to the many different skills you're practicing. Because of that, real-world activities like martial arts and certain school curricula have shown more widespread cognitive benefits than targeted computerized training. Sometimes the reason something works is very different from what anyone expected. CogMed is the most heavily researched computerized training method for improving working memory. It has the most data behind it. It has scores of studies. I haven't seen any study except one mention that there's a mentoring component to CogMed. To be certified to administer CogMed, the adults getting the package must get trained in and committed to mentoring those who do CogMed. A new study out of the Netherlands shows that it seems to be the mentoring component which is making for the benefits, not what's on the computer. Nobody expected that. Executive functions need to be continually challenged to see improvements, not just used, but challenged, and Laura talked about this. Erickson spent his whole career studying what makes an expert in any different field, found that it took gazillion hours of practice. He said 10,000 hours. And not just practice, but practice where you keep pushing your limits, keep pushing your comfort zone. Because if you don't keep pushing to get better, you don't get better. So you need repeated practice where you keep working on the skills, pushing yourself to improve. Prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain I specialize in, is overrated. To learn something new, we need prefrontal. But after something is no longer new, the people who perform best often recruit prefrontal least. So here's an old neuroimaging slide from the 1990s on a task that requires prefrontal cortex. So you can see in some people you get bilateral activation of prefrontal. In some people you get activation in one hemisphere, and other subjects you get activation in the other. That's fine. That's normal individual variation. We're very happy with that. Nobody objects. The problem is that two subjects didn't show it at all. This is Ruth Brigida and Kathy O'Craven, my colleagues, collaborators on the study. And because they were familiar with the task, prefrontal cortex activation dropped out. When something's new, those who recruit prefrontal most usually perform best. But when you're really good at it, you're often not using prefrontal so much. We want tasks to be so familiar and well-learned that you don't need prefrontal, that it can be passed off to older areas of the brain that have had much longer over the course of evolution to perfect their functioning. And they can subserve task performance ever so much better than can prefrontal cortex. A child may know intellectually, at the level of prefrontal, that he shouldn't hit another child. But in the heat of the moment, if that knowledge hasn't become automatic, become passed off from prefrontal cortex to older brain regions, the child's going to hit another. Even though if you asked him right afterwards, should you hit? He says no. He knows you shouldn't. It's the difference between knowing it in your head, knowing it at intellectual level, knowing it at the level of prefrontal, and having it be second nature or automatic. The only way something becomes automatic, becomes passed off from prefrontal, is through action, repeated action. Nothing else will do. And Aristotle realized that back in the 4th century BC. He said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. We don't act rightly because we have virtue or excellence, but we rather have these because we've acted rightly. These virtues are formed in a person by doing the actions. We are what we repeatedly do. The importance of learning through doing. We only really learn something when it's relevant for us, when we're going to need it for something we want to do. Otherwise, we don't pay attention the same way. For example, if I asked you who's going to learn a route better, the driver or the passenger in the car, all of you know the answer, and all of you know why. The driver has to pay attention to the route because he needs it to navigate. The passenger's just passively sitting there. And for some reason, even though we've known this from research for decades, we still tend to have children in general sitting like you, passively listening, and the teacher's up here using the information, learning it very well. It doesn't make sense. We all know they're going to learn it better if it's hands-on and they have to use it. My son gave me a brilliant lecture on how to program the VCR. It was clear, it was elegant, it was gorgeous. A week later, when I went to program the VCR, could I do it? No, because I hadn't listened with a mindset of using it the week earlier. When learning is hands-on, so kids are working on their own or with a few other kids, then the teacher now is free to teach the way all of us would like. So he or she can spend time with individual children because nobody's missing out because they're busy doing their own things. So she can take time to help somebody, to challenge somebody, to observe, to talk, to see what's going on, to see what might help. That everybody can progress at their own rate because it doesn't matter because they're all working on their own. There's so many benefits from this. Prefrontal cortex is the newest area of the brain and the most vulnerable. If you're sad or stressed, lonely, sleep-deprived, or not physically fit, prefrontal cortex and executive functions are going to suffer first and most. Similarly, stress, sadness, or lack of social or emotional support often lie at the root of health problems. For example, asthma is a particularly clear case of this. Conversely, we show better executive functions when we're happy, feel socially supported, and we're healthy and physically fit. Indeed, it seems that what makes for the best executive functions, less stress, social engagement and support, being physically active, also makes for the healthiest lives and greatest longevity. Our brains work better when we're not in a stressed emotional state, and that's particularly true for prefrontal cortex and executive functions. Stress impairs executive functions and can cause anybody to look as if you have an executive function impairment like ADHD, when that's not the case at all. You may have noticed that when you're stressed, you can't think as clearly or exercise as good self-control. When I'm stressed, I reach for the chocolate. So some kids who your first reaction might be that they have ADHD might not have ADHD at all, but might be experiencing a lot of stress. This is one reason why stress particularly affects prefrontal cortex. Dopamine is an important neurotransmitter in many areas of the brain, including prefrontal. Even mild stress dramatically increases the level of dopamine in prefrontal. That's the dark bar here. But no other area of the brain. You don't see it anywhere else from just mild stress. The prefrontal cortex needs dopamine like your car engine needs gasoline. But if you flood your car engine with gasoline, it can't work properly. If you flood prefrontal cortex with dopamine, it can't work properly. That's one reason. Another reason is cortisol. In humans and primates in general, there are more glucocorticoid receptors in prefrontal cortex than in the hippocampus. Although if you read the research literature, you might think it's the hippocampus because much of the research is done in rodents. And in rodents, the hippocampus is where there are more glucocorticoid receptors. And one final reason has to do with connectivity between prefrontal cortex and different brain regions. In college students, 1 month of stress in preparation for a major exam disrupts prefrontal cortex functional connectivity and executive functions. When you're sad, you have worse selective attention. When you're happy, you have better selective attention. People show more creativity when they're happy. The most heavily researched predictor of creativity in social psychology is mood. The most robust finding is that a happy mood leads to greater creativity. It's not that sadder people are less creative than happy ones, but that within an individual, in general, not always, but in general, you tend to be more creative when you're more happy than when you're more miserable. If you're stressed, you can't be the parent or teacher you want to be. And I can guarantee 100% that worrying about whether you're a good enough parent won't improve your parenting at all. It will only make it worse. It's important to remember that imperfect is not the same as worthless. Now you say, well, I know that, you don't have to tell me. But how many times have you gotten really down on yourself because you made a mistake? It was just a mistake. But you can get really down on yourself. Even the people you most respect make mistakes and have done things they regret. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody's imperfect. Yet each of us is wonderful in our own way, even though we're imperfect. And you can be a terrific parent, even though you can't be the perfect parent. So relax. Your humanity is more important than your knowledge or skill or doing the textbook perfect thing. Your caring, your openness to truly listen, being there for your child when he or she needs you is more important than your knowledge or skill. So you don't have a lot of money, you don't have fancy gadgets, it doesn't matter. The kid in the kitchen is very happy banging the pots and pans. What matters is who you are. Melhus did a study looking at early childhood education across the world, across every country in the world for which he could get data. And what he found for the variable that matters the most is not the number of kids, it's not the caregiver-child ratio, it's not the quality of the materials. They matter, but they're not the most important. The most important thing that matters is the relationship between the adults and the kids. People who make a difference in your life are not the ones with the most credentials, the most money, or the most awards. They're the ones who care. And children need to understand that it's okay for them to make mistakes. In El Sistema, which is an orchestra program I'm quite fond of, they tell the kids going wrong is just something you do on the way to going right. Nothing to worry about. Einstein said anyone who's never made a mistake has never tried anything new. And if you think about it, the only way to be sure you won't make a mistake is to stay with what you already know. Because if you go beyond what you already know, you don't know. So by definition, you might be wrong. You have a 50-50 chance of being wrong. So the only way to be sure you won't be wrong is not to grow. Just stay with what you know. If you venture past what you know, you might be wrong because you don't know. When we find out we were right, we're not learning anything new. It's only when we're surprised, when we were wrong, that we learn something we didn't know before. So my students in my lab are always terribly disappointed when their hypothesis isn't confirmed in their experiment. But I tell them they should rejoice. Now they have the opportunity to learn something they didn't know before. How fantastic is that? Now they can make the really big discovery instead of just showing that what we thought was true is true. Children need to feel safe, to push the limits, to venture into the unknown, to take the risk of making a mistake or being wrong. They won't do that if they're afraid you might embarrass them. They can't relax if they're worried that you might embarrass them. It's really important not to embarrass kids. One major source of stress for many children is feeling that they're not smart enough, that they can't learn and they'll never succeed. Children need to believe in themselves. And there are two roots to that. One is to see that you believe in them and you fully expect them to succeed. And the other is by giving them doable challenges, things that are really hard, that they see that they conquer. Because then they see for themselves that they can do things. So for the first one, that we need to believe in them. It's important to communicate loud and clear the faith and expectation that each child will succeed. Toddlers fall on the way to walking. They all do that. In a day when a toddler maybe fell 4 or 5 times, it would never occur to us to say, you get a D in walking today. We'd never say that. We all say, don't worry, I'm sure you're going to be able to do this. How different is that from the message kids get in school? They fail a math test today and they get a D. Instead of, there's no question you're going to be able to do this. And we together are going to figure out a way to make that happen. And doable challenges where they see for themselves that they are capable. That's so important. If you always make it easy for them because you're afraid of their failing, then they'll never get the confidence that they can do it. And it's through repeated experiences of that, there's no way in the world I'm going to be able to do that. And you keep working at it and keep working at it, and then you get it, and you succeed, and then the coach or the teacher says, okay, here's the next one. And you go, what are you talking about? There's no way I can do that. And through repeated practice, you do it, and then you start appreciating, hey, if I work at it, I can do these things. We need to give even young ones time to figure things out on their own. Don't intervene to help too early. Show that you have faith in the child. Trust that there's an excellent chance that he or she will be able to solve the problem on his own. So a child's talking to you about a problem, it's important that you listen rather than immediately go to problem solving and suggest the solution. It's best if the solution can come from your child. This is an example of a 3-year-old trying to stack graded size boxes one on top of another. And he's having quite a hard time. He's making a lot of mistakes. And people are very tempted to want to go in there and help him. But thankfully they don't. And so he gets the pride and satisfaction of having done it himself. There's no sound with this video. You need patience. And look how long he sustained his attention, because he was really interested in what he was doing. I love this quote, and I particularly love it because of who said it. You've never failed until you've tried for the last time. You've never lost until you quit. I love that. Samuel Proctor Macy was born in the segregated South in the early 1900s. You know he encountered a lot of discrimination, setbacks, and failures. Yet he rose to become one of the most highly decorated and respected chemists of the 20th century. You haven't failed till you stop trying. Edison said, when you have exhausted all the possibilities, remember this: you haven't. Poverty is a stressor. Food, housing, and job insecurity are stressors. Divorce, death, or strife in the family are stressors. Violence in the home or community are stressors. It's important to try to minimize stresses in children's lives and in their parents' lives, and to give children and their parents better ways to handle stress in their lives. So just to mention a few things: touch relieves stress. Hugs are wonderful. Pets relieve stress. There's a lot of evidence that a dog in the classroom reduces stress and helps the children do better. There's also evidence that bringing a dog to work reduces stress. Exercise reduces stress. Exercise in almost any form reduces stress. Meditation can reduce stress. But little kids, 3-4 years of age, aren't built to be sitting for 20 minutes meditating on their breathing. Not going to work. So walking meditation is much more appropriate for the little ones. In Montessori classrooms, they have this oval that children try to walk on. And for little 3 or 4-year-olds to walk on a line is as hard for us as to walk on a balance beam. They have to really concentrate and pay attention. And once they can do that, you can make it more difficult. So one of the things you can do is you can make a game where everybody does it, even the adults. Everybody has a bell. You're trying to walk on a line or follow a leader. And the rules are, nobody should make a sound with their bell. That's walking meditation. But nobody tells the kids we're going to do walking meditation. You say we're going to play a game. Our brains work better when we're not feeling lonely or socially isolated, and that's particularly true for prefrontal cortex and executive functions. We're fundamentally social. We need to belong, we need to fit in and be liked. Children who are lonely or ostracized will have more difficulty learning. In one study, they told one group of subjects to expect that they would have close relationships throughout their lives. They had filled out a questionnaire, and the researchers said we could tell from that. They told another group of subjects the opposite, and they told a third group of subjects unrelated bad news. On simple memorization questions that don't require executive functions, all 3 groups perform comparably. But on logical reasoning that requires executive functions, those told to expect that they'd be lonely perform worse. Other researchers haven't tried to manipulate this. They'll just give subjects a survey when they come in the lab, and some of the questions on the survey are, do you feel socially supported? Do you feel lonely? And one group of researchers found, for example, that prefrontal cortex functions less efficiently in people who report that they feel lonely or isolated. And it's not just peers. A close relationship with a caring adult can be huge. And we're not just intellects, emotions, and social, we also have bodies. And you need your sleep. If lack of sleep will make you look like you have an executive function impairment, when you don't, you're simply sleepy. The brain doesn't recognize the same sharp division between cognitive and motor function that we impose in our thinking. The same or substantially overlapping brain systems subserve both cognitive and motor function. For example, the pre-SMA area of the brain is important for sequential tasks, and it doesn't matter whether they're sequential motor tasks or sequential cognitive tasks. Motor development and cognitive development appear to be fundamentally intertwined. The different parts of the human being are fundamentally interrelated. Each part, cognitive, spiritual, social, emotional, and physical, probably develops best when no part is neglected. I predict that those activities that will most successfully improve executive functions will not only work on training and improving executive functions directly, but also will indirectly support executive functions by working to reduce things that impair them, like stress or loneliness, and working to enhance things that support them, like happiness or feeling socially supported. What activities directly train and challenge executive functions and indirectly support them by also addressing our social, emotional, and physical needs? Traditional activities that have been around for millennia. For tens of thousands of years, across all cultures, storytelling, dance, art, music, and play have been part of the human condition. People in all cultures made music, sang, danced, did sports, and played games. There are good reasons why those activities have lasted so long and arose everywhere. They address our cognitive, emotional, and social and physical needs. And I don't care, well, first let me just show you a couple of examples. This is music, obviously. I'm a huge fan of Elsie Stemma. This is dance, and I'm a huge fan of the National Dance Institute, which does in dance very much the same thing that Elsie Stemma does in music. And because they challenge executive functions directly and indirectly support executive functions by increasing joy, a sense of belonging, and physical exercise, I predict they should improve executive functions. That's a prediction because when I apply for research money to show it, when I mention music or dance, the reviewer's eyes glaze over. So far I haven't been able to test it, but I will. I'll get the money some way. Almost any activity, though, could be the way in, the means for disciplining the mind and enhancing resilience. Many different activities could do that. The key is that the child really enjoy the activity and really want to do it. So he or she will spend a lot of time at it, pushing him or herself to improve, because the benefits are going to come from the time practicing and pushing yourself. If you don't like it, you're not going to put in that kind of time and effort. So we might as well have kids do something that they can put their hearts and soul into. And I don't care what it is, as long as it hits the chords I mentioned, challenges executive function, and makes you feel happier, socially supported, and use your body. So it could be caring for an animal. It could be doing a service activity. It could be doing something in nature. I wanted to mention something about service activities. Research shows that what brings people the most happiness isn't money or creature comforts, but making other people happy, helping others, seeing the smile on someone's face because of something you did. Now, David Yeager has done this intervention with high school students. He encourages them to see and reflect on how working hard in school can help them accomplish meaningful, beyond the self goals, such as making the world better or contributing to their community. It's only a single 45-minute session online. You don't even meet anybody face to face. The students are first asked to write briefly about how they wish the world could be a better place. Then